time to go back to that little town in Maine. Here's my vlog of me rereading Salem's Lot. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dave Musson, at Dave Musson on Instagram, and this is a place where I talk to you about all things Stephen King. Now, this is a special video, part of a series that I started a little earlier in the year to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Carrie. You might remember that I did a reread of Carrie and I vlogged my experience of it. And I promised then that that would be the start of a chronological reread, what is going to be my third chronological read of Stephen King's works. And well, then loads of life has happened. But it's now time to get back on that rereading horse. And this video is going to document my experience of going back to Salem's Lot, Stephen King's second book from 1975. Yep, it's the one with vampires in. It's his first experience of a small town, properly building that town. And recording this as I am before I start my reread, I am very excited to go back. Now, should say thank you for checking this video out, particularly as it's a special and it's probably going to be much longer than my other videos. If you want to see some other stuff I do, check the links in the description to my Stephen King quiz book, to my own fiction, my newsletter, all that kind of stuff. More than anything, thank you very much for checking this video out. So here's how we're going to do this reading vlog. I'm basically going to get started very shortly. I'll show you my editions of Salem's Lot and I'll show you which one I'm going to pick. And then I will try and document bits and pieces of my reading experience as I revisit Salem's Lot over the next few days, I'm guessing. In reality for you, it'll be the next few minutes. And there are a few things that I'm looking for that once I've done my reread, I will come back and sit here and do some final thoughts, but some particular things that I'm looking for. This is kind of the loose structure that I came up with the Carrie reread. So those things that I'm going to be looking for are as follows. So once I've summed up my final thoughts, I'm going to go back to my Kingo card. If you remember, that's my Stephen King themed bingo card with a bunch of different things on there to look out for in Stephen King books. There are 19 of them, of course, so we'll see how many of those we tick off in Salem's Lot. I'm also going to tell you my favourite line. I'm going to pick out 3 pros and 3 cons. So 3 things I really liked about Salem's Lot, 3 things I didn't like so much about Salem's Lot. And then I'm going to go through and gather up some of the things that I noticed for the first time, because the beauty of doing a reread, friends, is that you notice things that you didn't notice the first time around. So I know the story of Salem's Lot. My eyes can be paying more attention to what else is going on the page. That might be a bunch of 19s that I'd never spotted before. It might be references to other King works. Now at this point in King's career, those are probably going to be nods to future King works, but we'll see what we come up with. And then I'll wrap things up by giving it a score, a rating out of 5. Carrie's rating was out of 5 token nubs, jiggling proudly up front, or something along those lines. This one is probably going to be out of 5 bitey teeth, but I'll decide on that once we get there. So I'm going to start my read very shortly, but first I just want to quickly show you my editions and let you know which one I'm going to be using for this reread, because I'm sure you're desperate to know. So I only have 2 editions of Salem's Lot, and actually with this rereading series we're going to get to the point soon where I only have 1 edition, and that's fine, I'll still show you my editions. But I've got 2 editions of Salem's Lot. The one I'm going to be reading is this one from my Rainbow collection. This is one of the first Stephen King books I picked up. I think this is the first Rainbow book I actually got, so that's exciting. This one is the illustrated edition. It's got 2 extra stories in it. It says that they are... No, it doesn't. Ignore me. There are 2 extra stories. I thought it said that they were unpublished, but they're not. The extra stories are Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road, which of course are both in Night Shift, which I'll be getting to fairly soon anyway. But there are some deleted scenes in this, which I think is the previously unpublished stuff, which I'm excited to go back to because I don't remember any of them. And the illustrations are great. I'll pick them out as we go through. They're kind of illustration / photo art, but you can sort of see that. So that's the one I'm going to be reading. The other one I have, though, is this very cool early edition. I don't know if you can see it. I can't see what you're seeing, but there's a face there. Essentially, it looks very black. And the back is great. Great synopsis for you here. Salem's Lot. The town knew darkness, but no one dared talk about the high, sweet, evil laughter of the child and the sucking sounds. A spine-tingling novel by Stephen King, author of the million-copy bestseller, Carrie. So, I do like this edition, but I don't want to bend the pages in it too much, so I'm going to go with this one. And this has got the extra material as well. So, that is my book of choice for the read. Tell you what, before I start my reread, why don't I read the synopsis on the back of my reading edition? So, Salem's Lot is a small New England town with the usual quota of gossips, drinkers, weirdos and respectable folk. Of course there are tales of strange happenings, but not more than in any other town its size. Ben Mears, a moderately successful writer, returns to the Lot to write a novel based on his early years and to exorcise the terrors that have haunted him since childhood. The event he witnessed in the house now rented by a new resident, a newcomer with a strange allure, a man who causes Ben some unease as things start to happen. A child disappears, a dog is brutally killed. There's something for the bingo card already. Nothing unusual, except the list starts to grow. Soon surprise will turn to bewilderment, bewilderment to confusion, and finally to terror. And as it says here, this is complete with 50 pages of alternate and deleted scenes and a new introduction by the author and 2 original short stories, all brought to life in Jerry Usman's creepy photographs. I'm excited now. Let's get on with it, shall we? Here's my vlog of rereading Salem's Lot by Stephen King. I'll check in with you along the way, and then we'll come back here once I'm done. So it's pretty late at night here. I've been to the cinema, but couldn't resist cracking on with Salem's Lot. I didn't get a chance to start it before I went to the cinema. So I've just read the introduction, probably going to read a couple of chapters before bed. But the introduction, so written in 2005, King actually talks more about the craft of writing than actually the story of Salem's Lot. And he says that this is the book where he learnt to not worry about plotting and to just let the story take control. And he makes the distinction between plotting and storytelling. And in the introduction he says specifically, so storytelling, which is where he just lets the story do what it needs to. He says storytelling is as natural as breathing. Plotting is the literary version of artificial respiration, which is something he has held on to throughout his career, but started with this book, so I thought that was an interesting way to set the tone here. Time to read about some vampires. Here's the first illustration / picture. Pretty cool. So I'm calling that a wrap for tonight. Read a couple of chapters, reacquainted myself with Ben Mears. He's a bit of a creep. Met Susan. They seem to be getting on swimmingly, and started to get to know the town a little bit. It's immediately apparent that King had so much more confidence in his writing and clearly had more space and room to breathe with his writing in this one compared to Carrie, because Carrie was very much driven by that energy of writing short stories that were a real driver for getting income for his family, whereas this one, he's got a deal to do this, and you can tell he's having fun taking his time. It's much more of a bedding in part of the novel rather than just trying to be straight in there. So yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. And one quote that stood out to me that I'm going to leave this little video with is just when it's talking about the town. Just a nice bit of foreshadowing, I guess. Nothing too nasty can happen in such a nice little town. Not there. Well, we'll soon see how that changes. Night night. So day 2 of rereading Salem's Lot. Past the 100-page mark now. Just done the first Lot chapter, which was really good. I'd forgotten how good those chapters are. Where you're just floating around town, seeing everything that's happening, meeting loads of characters. Is a really smart way of bringing this large cast together and just getting you up to speed and getting you settled in town. And it ends on a really dark note as well. So a few things I've spotted in my reading today that I thought were worth mentioning. A few creepy things. I mean, obviously with the Glick boys, that's a particularly creepy scene. I also found it really creepy that, so we were talking about the Musson house train and the history of it and how they found it with dead people in, but they also raided it for some of its books, and some of the books from the Musson house is still in the library in Salem's Lot. I just found that creepy for some reason. And we've got a bunch of things on the bingo card already. So we've got a small town with a dark secret, obviously. We've got Maine. We've got a writer character, of course. We get a dead dog. We get a terrifying bully who Mark Petrie beats up. And we get the line, the most delectable set of Jehubis you ever set eyes on. So, the Nubbins box is ticked for sure as well. And a couple of things I hadn't noticed before. So, Mark Petrie is a new kid. I'd forgotten that. There was what I thought was maybe an early working out of what Holly Gibney might become, because one of the characters talks about cooker instead of saying shit. Doesn't seem to be able to bring herself to say shit, although this character then goes and punches her own baby, which is pretty dark, but kind of relatable as well for that situation. We get mentions of a deadfall, and talking about the Musson house, talking about how it might, one of the characters says he believes that it absorbs things, which kind of made me think of The Shining as well. So, yeah, I'm having a lovely time. I feel like it's just about to start getting really scary, so I might read a bit more before bed, or I might come back to it tomorrow. But there's your update from day 2 of rereading Salem's Lot. So day 3 of rereading Salem's Lot. I've not done any reading of it at all today yet, because I took my Kindle with me to work today and started a different book. So it's bedtime, my children are asleep, I'm going to get a cookie, and then I'm going to carry on with this. Catch you later. So I'd forgotten quite how good the Lot chapters are in Salem's Lot. So the second one, just over the space of the first few parts of it, kind of encapsulates everything that is brilliant about Salem's Lot. So it starts off with this thoroughly compelling and beautifully written description of autumn/fall that just cuts through and is perfect. It's just so well written and just so evocative and just brings you into the land, the setting and the seasons. And then from there we go into the funeral of Danny Glick, which is so harrowing. Like the way Danny Glick's father reacts, just really desperately sad and affecting. And then after that, you get the scene with Mike Ryerson putting the earth back on top of Danny's coffin and being convinced the whole time that somebody's watching him, and then being convinced that Danny's eyes are open in the coffin and he has to go through and do that. And that's just horrific and so scary. Like the whole scene is just like, it really feels like something's crawling under your skin. And they're all in the same chapter of the book. Like, he had it. I think I said this in the Carrie reread, but he really had it right from the start. What's also interesting as well is you can tell, like knowing what King's writing's like now, you can tell this is early on in his career and he's still trying to impress people. And he's still trying to prove himself, because there are bits of writing here where it just feels like he's stretching a little bit, and it's not a bad thing at all. But he's a little bit more literary in this than he would go on to be once he was established and comfortable and just bashing stuff out with a very easy feel. There's still an element here of trying to impress. I can't quite articulate exactly what it is, but there's like, he makes little nods and references to stuff that I think in his writing now he would explicitly spell out. So he talks about, oh, so and so thought of the line from such and such, or the idea from somewhere else. Like I say, you would get them spelled out now. This is almost like done with a sort of nod and a wink of like, oh, I've read that thing, or I'm aware of that cultural reference. I don't know, it just strikes me as this is still a writer with something to prove. It's understandable, right? It's his second book. But it's interesting seeing the difference. Like, this is almost the King as we know it, but not quite. There's still a sense of, like, trying to get himself out there. Perhaps towing the line a little bit. But just trying to impress, really. Whereas now, he knows that millions of people will read whatever he puts out. And he still writes well, obviously. But, yeah, it's fascinating going back and looking at this point in his career. And just seeing that, like, he's really writing a brilliant book here. But you can tell he's really trying, and you can tell it's a stretch. And it feels like, as you're reading this book, you're watching the real Stephen King sort of take shape and take form, which I'm really enjoying. And yeah, it's starting to get scary now. But yeah, just wanted to articulate that rambling thought while it was fresh in my head. I'm going to go back and read some more, because it's bloody great. So another day on the reread of Salem's Lot. Don't know how much I'm going to get done today because I've got band practice tonight, which is very exciting. But I'm just on my lunch break from work and I am going to do some reading now. Last night I got to the end of part 1, which means I've got an illustration to show you. So for part 2, The Emperor of Ice Cream. I really like the illustration / photography in here. I think they really capture the mood very well. Part 1, great. Ends, of course, with Matt Burke taking Mike Ryerson home because he looks a bit peaky at the bar, and then we just end with the sounds of somebody being let into the upstairs window, and then child's laughter, and then suckling sounds. It's all coming together now. So yeah, very excited. I've been jotting down a few things that I haven't noticed before. I think I'll cover those in the bit at the end though, because otherwise we'll never get there. So suffice to say, I'm having a lovely time. It's getting scary, it's getting bitey, it's getting vampire-y. Let's go. Here's the illustration for part 3. And yes, I know I owe you a proper update. I will do that in good time. So I have been a terrible vlogger for this reread of Salem's Lot. It's the school holidays, life's just getting in the way, but I have about 50 pages left to read of the story, so I imagine I'll finish reading it tonight. Continuing to have a lovely time. It's all going pretty crazy. The scene with Marjorie Glick coming back, excellent. The scene with the kids in the bus, chef's kiss. Jimmy Cody being tricked to fall down the stairs and impale himself on all those knives. So good. Yeah, I think there's lots and lots of good stuff here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully finishing tonight, and then I've got all those deleted scenes to read as well, which I'm going to include in this vlog. But yeah, just wanted to check in to say sorry for not providing as many updates as usual. But rest assured, I am having a great time, and I will try and cover everything in the final thoughts section, pros and cons, keeping track of the bingo card and all of that stuff. But yeah, vampires are vampiring. We're rushing to the climax. Who's going to make it out alive? I mean, I know, but I'll also find out later. Bye bye. Final illustration for the epilogue. Yeah. So a minor miracle yesterday. My two boys actually played with each other nicely enough for long enough for me to finish the story of Salem's Lot. So I've just got the deleted scenes to read and then I'll be done. So yeah, had a great time with the story. I will elaborate more in my final thoughts section, but I'll probably, before I get there, I'll probably go over anything interesting from those deleted scenes before that. But yeah, just thought you'd all like to know that I finally got there. Hooray! So I've done with all of the deleted scenes, which means I've properly finished Salem's Lot. I will reflect more and come to my final thoughts tomorrow as I'm recording this in a few minutes as you're watching. But just had some notes from the outtakes that I thought were interesting. So originally Salem's Lot, the town was going to be called Musson, which is a rubbish name for a town. Quite confusing in the outtakes because I kept forgetting. I was thinking, where's this Musson place? But that's Salem's Lot. But a few things I spotted. Something that didn't make the final cut was a reference to Negroid lips again, which we saw in Carrie. That was cut. Good thing. Something that comes up a lot in King's early work is a reference to Bluebeard's wife. That was cut from the final version. Something that did make me laugh is there's a scene between Ben and Susan, and Ben says that every author makes a guest appearance. Yep, I mean, if you didn't realise that Ben was a version of Stephen King, then that would have confirmed it. Couple of things that sort of were very different to how it panned out in the final version of the book. So one more famous one is that Jimmy Cody's death is different originally. So in the finished book, he walks down a rigged staircase and lands on a bunch of knives and is very brutally impaled and dies on them. Even more brutally in the original manuscript, though, he goes down into the cellar and is just swamped by rats everywhere. It's a very brutal death, and there's an argument to be made that it's stronger and scarier, but actually I think the final decision was the correct one, because throughout these outtakes there's a lot more references to rats, and they didn't make the final cut. So by the time you were seeing Jimmy getting eaten by these rats without those references, they sort of appear out of nowhere and doesn't really work with the flow of the rest of the story. And also, if they'd have kept the rats, then you later get a deleted scene where Mark and Ben are going down there to try and find Barlow, and it's like they're sort of constantly having to fight off these rats, and it's just too much. It's just too overwhelming. It's like these rats are like treacle or something, and it just doesn't work. So I think that was a good decision for me. One thing that did get cut that I think was a shame was that when Jimmy and Mark go out to the trailer park and they discover the family with the baby, so the two parents and the baby, and in the final version they drag the dad out into the sunlight and he writhes around a bit and then crawls back into his crawl space, and they sort of start marking up the houses. In the original, they take the baby out, put him in the sunlight, and he starts writhing. So they stake the baby, and it is brutal. And the moment the baby is staked, his body catches up to where it should be, like instantly kind of puffs up and decomposes, and it's horrific. I totally get why it was cut, particularly in 1975, but for me this is the only thing from the outtakes that I think would have been stronger staying in, because it was so powerful. So powerful. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, huge difference, is that originally Callahan didn't drink Barlow's blood and then have to leave town as an outsider. Callahan realises he's going to lose to Barlow, so kills himself violently with a knife. And Barlow is so annoyed that he decapitates his corpse and sort of strings his headless corpse up in a mockery of crucifixion. And again, I think the right decision was made, but it just got my mind worrying about the butterfly effect of that. Like, had Callahan originally died in this, the repercussions for the Dark Tower, like 20 years down the line, massive. So yeah, and I don't think King would have been thinking at that point what he was going to do with Callahan. So that fairly small decision
had massive consequences. So I think it was right that Callahan did survive, but interesting, I'd completely forgotten from reading these outtakes before that he didn't make it originally. So yeah, I enjoyed seeing that again. So there we go, we've done the reread, we've done the outtakes. I'm going to ponder this some more, and then I'll come right back at you with some final thoughts. We'll tally up the bingo score, do my pros and cons, stuff I didn't notice before, all of that kind of stuff, and a rating out of 5 sets of chompy teeth. So stick around for that. So, time for some final thoughts on my reread of Salem's Lot. And cheesy as it is to say, this book had teeth, and I really enjoyed it. It was a real treat going back to Salem's Lot for the first time in quite a few years, and particularly just really seeing how confident King's writing had grown. I think I mentioned this earlier in the vlog, but the difference between Carrie and this is staggering in terms of not so much like the story and the impact. I think they're both really strong, but just the confidence in his writing in this one. I'm going to put it down because I was going to keep messing with it. You can see that he's really reveling in having more pages to play with and really enjoying taking his time to build the town, take us around, show us the people, let us get to know the place, get to know the characters, but also sort of build this just mass of dread and have it form above us while you're reading it, and slowly pushing down, squeezing down and down and down, before he then just unleashes everything in a quite frantic final 100 pages that you're just flying through to read to the end after having been sort of almost ambling through most of it. Just for him to do this on his second book, just the assuredness in his own writing and the confidence in his own world building, and just the writing itself is definitely a step up from Carrie to Salem's Lot, and it's not as refined as it would become yet. I think that's what's most interesting here. You can see a really talented writer here, but you can still see that it's about potential at this point. But yeah, I particularly enjoyed just seeing that difference in his writing style. So I mentioned that Carrie showed potential, and this one continues to show potential, but it also shows him realising some of that potential, particularly around the scary stuff. Some of the scares here are incredible. I mean, anything to do with the Glicks, Susan Norton not leaving any footprints in the earth as she's walking around, Jimmy Cody's death, the school bus, Mike Ryerson, the confrontations with Barlow. Like, so many iconic scary scenes here. Arguably more iconic scary scenes in this book alone than the majority of horror authors manage in an entire career. Like, any of the ones listed here you could pick out, and that would be one single standout in another writer's entire life probably. And this is just a bunch of stuff all in one book. So good, so scary, and massively ramped up a notch compared to Carrie on the scares front. This, of course, is also King doing small town, and he touched on that a little bit in Carrie, but this is where we first really see him build a town from scratch, act as our tour guide, take us there, and then make us wish we'd probably never actually been there in the first place. But so good. The Lot chapters in this book are incredible. So powerful. I remembered liking them before, but they're worth a reread just on their own. Some wonderful writing about the environment, about the seasons, but also some of those terrifying scares are about people. Just so much to enjoy just from those chapters alone. So I'm going to do as I did with Carrie, going to go through a few sections for you. I've got them down on my list here so I don't forget them, but we're going to review the score on the Stephen King bingo card, the Kingo card. If you don't know what that is, just check out my video on the Stephen King bingo. I'm going to share with you 3 pros and 3 cons that I found from this reread of Salem's Lot. I'm going to share with you a list of things that I spotted for the first time, and this is mainly like connections to other Stephen King works, so a few things to throw in there. I'm going to share with you my favourite line from the book, and then we'll wrap up
with a rating out of 5. And this time it's going to be out of 5 pairs of bitey teeth. So let's go in with that Kingo card. Now, you remember from my Stephen King bingo card, there are 19 items on there. Salem's Lot scores 11.5 out of 5. So the things we get a terrifying bully. It's the one that Mark Petrie beats down in the playground. We get a small town, obviously. We get a blue chambray shirt. When Callahan leaves, he's wearing a blue chambray shirt. We get brand names. Pow Mau cigarettes in particular towards the end are a brand name mentioned. Nubbins, of course we get nubbins. We get a most delectable set of Jehubis, in fact. We get amazing sex for the woman, for Susan. Half a point is the old man, young kid friendship relationship. Because while I wouldn't call Ben Mears an old man, he is an older man. And he obviously forms a very strong bond with Mark Petrie. We get a 19 right towards the end. There's a mention of Vermont Route 19. So we're having that. There's a writer, of course, Ben Mears. There's a dead dog, quite brutally, early on in the book. We are with Mike Ryerson as he discovers the corpse of that dead dog. It's in Maine, of course. And there is even a reference to Full Dark. So there we go. 11.5 out of 19 for the Kingo card. So pros and cons then. I will start with my cons. So the 3 cons, I mean, again, we've got this language like Jehubis, which is a bit grim, but also following on from that kind of sexist language of the time, we get the inner monologue of Roy thinking about his wife Sandy, the one who's got the baby, and sort of being critical of her and her appearance and her body, and particularly the phrase sort of criticising inwardly that she never bounced back from the baby. I mean, fuck that. Particularly at this point, King had, 2 kids himself? Nah, you shouldn't be right. Even if it's a bad character, that's not a good thing to write. My second con was actually Anne Norton. I just found her really annoying, and to have 2 overbearing mothers in successive novels just felt a bit too much. Although that being said, the moment Susan Norton slapped her in the face was hella satisfying. But overall, she's still a con for me. And lastly, my biggest con is Ben Mears. I just, like every time I've read this book, I don't buy him as a hero. He's unconvincing as a hero, and I just don't like him. And he's a creep as well. Like when he first meets Susan and he signs that book for her and he writes it to Susan Norton, the prettiest girl in the park. It's like, dude, chill out. But yeah, I just find him annoying and very uninspiring as a hero. And he kind of gets to sort of take the glory of being the hero without doing much of the work, really. So he was my biggest con. But anyway, on to 3 pros I found from this reread of Salem's Lot. Number 1, the scares and the tension building. The scene where Mike Ryerson is burying Danny Glick and he knows that somebody somewhere is watching him, and he becomes increasingly paranoid about what's in the coffin. That scene is so good in terms of tension building and being terrifying at the same time. Yeah, put it straight to my veins. The second pro, the town itself. I've already talked about this, but how he builds that town. And there's a line in here about how small towns have long memories. I think that's brilliant. And the way he weaves the history of the town and the Musson house into the story without it taking over like it would do in the Tommyknockers, for example. Just really tightly, concisely done, and in a way that adds so much to the story. And then the third pro, as I've already mentioned, the confidence in this and the scope of this. This is his second novel. And he's not yet gone mega at this point. So he is still writing to prove himself and to make a name for himself and to try and make this a career for himself. So good. So good. Okay, let's move on to things I noticed for the first time in this reread. I've got a list here. I'm just going to have it to hand and read it to you. So some names I noticed that would become familiar in other books. So there's a Claude Bowie. And of course we see a David Bowie in The Colorado Kid. There's a Grover Verrill, and we see Verrills pop up time and time again. And we get Bonnie and written down the name wrong here, but we get the Sawyers, and of course we see a Sawyer later on in The Talisman. Now, the baby's full name is Randall Freitas McDougall. Is that an RF? Is that the first mention of an RF? Are we, like, is this baby... It's probably just coincidence, but an RF in King World? Weird that it's on a baby, but there we go. And also, that baby's mum, Sandy, she says cooker instead of shit, which feels like a very early Holly Gibneyism. I wonder if that was where that seed was sown. Something I'd not noticed before was that Mark Petrie was a new kid when he beats the bully. I'd just got it in my head that he was long established part of the town, but he is a new kid, which kind of explains, I guess, why he's able to get out, because he's not sucked into the everydayness of the town quite so much. I think obviously the store that Barlow and Straker set up has very strong links to Needful Things. We get mentions of the Musson house being a building that absorbs evil, which made me think of the Overlook Hotel. There's a mention of a huge red eye at one point, which made me think of the Crimson King. We get Ben when he's talking to Matt Burke, sort of jokingly saying that he always get, authors always get asked where they get their ideas from. That's a question Stephen King hates being asked. It's funny that he's even got a bee in his bonnet about it, even on book 2. There's a line where we learn that Matt has insomnia. There's a reference to psychopomps, which become a huge plot point in the Dark Half. We get King talking politics through his characters in this book, being critical of Reagan, I think it is. Don't think anybody really cared then. Just funny that people do care about it now when it's Trump. There's a reference to the boogeyman. On 520 of my edition, something I'm going to read actually, I really liked this. I felt like, I'm sure it must be, I felt like this was a reference to a tribute, if you would, to Something Wicked This Way Comes. Just need to find my right page for it. I've written down page 520, but I cannot see it on page 520. So there we go. It does start on 520. So you might remember the line from Something Wicked where 3 a.m. the character was talking about it being the soul's midnight and being closest to death you'll ever be while still being alive. So King writes here, at 3 in the morning, the blood runs slow and thick and slumber is heavy. The soul either sleeps in blessed ignorance of such an hour or gazes about itself in utter despair. There is no middle ground. At 3 in the morning, the gaudy paint is off that old whore, the world, and she has no nose and a glass eye. Gaiety becomes hollow and brittle, as in Poe's castle surrounded by the Red Death. Horror is destroyed by boredom. Love is a dream. Maybe less so the second part of that, but that opening part of that paragraph just made me think of Something Wicked, like you wouldn't think. We get a mention where Ben is thinking about shooting himself, and then Mark, which is a thought process that goes through the character of David in The Mist. There's a reference to Matt seeing a single drop of blood on his bedsheet after Mike Ryerson had sort of stayed. Obviously, that image came back in Rose Madder. And something that I forgot to mention when I was talking about the outtakes was how... Let me just find the quote. So, I'm going to find it for you because, yeah, it made me laugh. Now, this is something that is lost in translation between British English and American English. So it's in a deleted scene where Jimmy and Ben are talking about how Danny Glick didn't look dead. And he says, he looked ready... Jimmy and Matt. And Jimmy says, he looked ready to get right up and start shagging flies.
Right. Shall we shag now or shall we shag later?
I mean, just watch Austin Powers to work out what British people understand shagging to be. But, I mean, it's not physically possible for a human to shag flies. I guess he means like catching flies, but honestly, that made me howl. Shall we shag now or shall we shag later? And the last thing I noticed for the first time was that this book was basically 3 years in the process of writing. So October 72 to June 75. Absolutely, totally worth it. Okay, on to my favourite line. Now, I've got an honourable mention before I go to my favourite one. My honourable mention is in the second lot chapter, page 182 of my edition. And it's this couple of lines, sort of short paragraph together, that I just thought captured autumn beautifully. So it is, but when fall comes, kicking summer out on its treacherous ass as it always does one day sometime after the midpoint of September, it stays a while like an old friend that you have missed. It settles in the way an old friend will settle in your favourite chair and take out his pipe and light it, and then fill the afternoon with stories of places he has been and things he has done since he last saw you. And then it goes on a really long paragraph. Just lush description of autumn. Yeah, perfect, brilliant. But my favourite line. So my favourite line, one that really fits the atmosphere of the book. So it's when Matt Burke goes upstairs to see if Mike Ryerson has returned to his house. And he sees the door to the room, and the door is open ajar. And Matt knows that he had shut that door. And there's just this line here. The basis of all human fears, he thought. A closed door, slightly ajar. Whew. Yeah. Really good. Okay, so on to my overall ranking, rating, and then we'll check out of this reread and move on to the next one. Do let me know in the comments your thoughts about Salem's Lot, whether you've just read it for the first time or whether you've reread it, and let me know what score you'd give it out of 5 pairs of bitey teeth. For me, it's 4.5 pairs of bitey teeth out of 5. Better than Carrie, still leaving myself a little bit of leeway, although not much. But honestly, this book is great. And so my overall ranking, obviously Salem's Lot is 1, Carrie is 2, and we'll see how that develops. But yeah, I had a great time rereading this. I hope you enjoyed this vlog. There'll be more coming, so enjoy that. But otherwise, take care, thanks for watching, subscribe if you feel like it, and I will see you very soon.